Hi there, welcome to week 3 of ECE220. I hope the trimester is going well for you at the moment. Hopefully getting through weeks 1 and 2, things are starting to stabilize. You're getting used to the way things are done at the university, in the courses that you're doing, all these kind of things, really important. So I hope you're going well, and a level of morale between 1 and 5, you're somewhere at a 4 or 5 kind of level. Things might be a little stressful, but we're making positive progress through our course, which is great. All right, so this week we're looking at enhancing learning, play theory, and questioning. So these are really relevant to assessments 2 and 3 as what we're doing this year. So what I'm going to do is go to the next slide. So today our learning objectives, as opposed to objects, is to draw on some important documents and research highlighting the significance of play for learning, providing some examples of research on children learning through play, asking you to identify the science in some play situations and think about the challenges of knowing when and how to support children's learning through play, and consider the importance of questioning and children raising their own questions, which is really important. And of course, these are all, a lot of the ideas from today's lecture are from chapter 9 of the textbook, Science Learning Through Play. That refers to, I think, edition 3. Edition 4 will also have a chapter on play, so make sure you have a look at that. And the same, I think the edition 5 has just come out. So if you've got access to 5, make sure you're looking at the chapter that's focusing on play. So play-based learning is a context for learning through which children organize and make sense of their social worlds as they engage actively with people, objects, and representations. So this refers to play-based learning, so learning through play in that kind of way. So again, I'll just read that because quite important. A context for learning through which children organize and make sense of their social worlds. That part there is really important. So they make sense of their social worlds. So just obviously you've heard that we had a pandemic a few years ago, and I heard Chasey at schools got changed to COVID. So the person who had COVID was running around trying to tag the other kids who didn't have COVID. And the idea of Bali, you remember Bali, when you're playing Chasey or Tiggy, was I have a vaccine kind of thing. So you kind of get insight into the ideas that children are trying to process through changing the game in that significant way. What's COVID-19? What's a vaccine? They know it's got to do with getting a disease of some sort, getting sick. But how could we unpack that with our kids? How could we turn those opportunities into social moments? As they engage actively with people, objects, and representations. So they're engaging with people, that social constructivist idea that we've been talking about. We learn together new ideas and new concepts, but also through the objects that we're using as part of that play. So you could imagine if you've got a little area in your early childhood center that's dedicated to medicine, maybe a doctor's clinic and those kinds of things. COVID-19 could be part of that processing of what they're going through, that idea of what a needle does, what a syringe does, what does a stethoscope do in this context, is it of any use, washing our hands or wearing a mask. These are all objects that help children process what they're going through in the world. And then representations becomes part of that. So if you've got a play area that's dedicated to being a doctor's clinic, maybe having pictures of x-rays and people bandaged up, having storybooks, having animals that have got bandages on them and those kind of things that allow students to look at, a skeleton is a representation of the human body. It's a real thing, but it's also a representation of what's inside us. So think about those kind of things, that objects and representations, x-rays as well, can be part of that kind of process. Now, I've got a bit of a video here for you. So what I'm going to get you to do is watch the video. I'm going to pop the link, will be in the YouTube window, so you can click on that. I basically put it there because sometimes the internet connection can be a little dodgy. So I want you to have a look at that video. It's going to take 5 minutes to go through. It's of 2 little girls that are playing. They're making mint tea. So I want you to make some observations. You can write some notes about what they're saying, about what they're doing, and their relationship to each other. Okay, I'm just going to pause the recording now. So you go do that and come back. And we're back. So hopefully you took a couple of minutes to watch the video that I put online. Oh, that is online, that I've connected to. It's quite an interesting little video. So obviously these are 2 little girls, probably between the ages of 2 to 3 years old, that are playing together. We could see straight away there are very different personalities that are going on there. There was one little girl who was a bit more wanted to be the leader of the way this game was being played, and the other little girl who seemed a little bit younger, was quite happy to sit back and let the other girl lead the way the play was going on. The idea that we put a mint in there, that it's stirred, that we have to leave it for a bit, putting sugar in becomes part of that process. Packing away the sugar, but not too much sugar. Obviously she'd heard it from somebody who had said it to her. She moved the sugar away at a certain point. So we can see the relationship between these two students, the socialness that's gone into this aspect of play, but also that one child is pushing the play. Maybe she wanted to play mint. Maybe I think there's a carer or a teacher in the room that's also helping them play in that kind of way. So it was quite an interesting little vignette into it. And I'm sure you've got other ideas because you've all got a lot of experience about working with kids and some of the things you've observed. And how can we link this to science? So basically making tea becomes part of chemistry. That idea that we have leaves, tea leaves, mint leaves in this case, and the water is absorbing them in some sort of way. How does stirring benefit this process? What does putting sugar in actually mean? So we put sugar in, we have to stir it. We're using words like dissolve. So we're mixing the sugar in, we're hoping it will dissolve in the water. And what's that going to do? What is the outcome of putting sugar in there? Well, we want it to be a bit sweeter than it normally is. So we're actually starting to taste it. So that comes into our physical body. What do our senses do? That idea of taste becomes important. So there's a lot of science that's in that little bit of a moment right there. And there are different ways that you can explore that with your kids. Right, so play is a context for learning that, one, allows the expression of personality and uniqueness. And we got that in spades, didn't we, in the Mint Tea video. The different personalities of the girls, one's a bit more outgoing, one's a bit more withdrawn, and that's fine. Either way is a great way of being. They're quite different in who they are. Play enhances disposition such as curiosity and creativity. So play is an opportunity for these ideas to be expressed. We all know that child that's quite curious. Why did you dig it up? Well, I wanted to see what's at the bottom. Okay. Elements of creativity. And well, creativity could be expressed in different ways. I have a niece who's very much interested in Lego and putting them together in unique ways that weren't prescribed on the box. And you'll have kids like that, no doubt. Language can be quite a unique way of expressing creativity, the ability to rhyme certain words or to use words that are quite difficult for a 3 or 4-year-old can be part of that kind of process. So playing in that particular way is very important. It enables children to make connections between prior experiences and new learning. And no doubt you've had that experience. That idea of making connection of your world and new learning. So that COVID-19 Tiggy example that I gave you before would be one example of that. And kids in early childhood will have done a lot of things. They've gone to parks, they may have they've gone to the doctors. I have strong memories when I was little of going to the ANZ Bank with my mum when she was putting her paycheck in every week and those kind of things. No doubt you've got those. Being in the kitchen with parents at this age, maybe some kids will have memories of going on a plane. And all these kind of things can be connected to whatever we're doing. So if we're doing air and flight, like we did in week 1, air and flight has to do with how a plane lifts off the ground and the actual force of it. And those kind of things come into it. So always make sure that if you're trying to introduce a new learning experience for your students, you're introducing a new idea or a new concept, thinking and making sure that you can connect it something they've done in their real life or experiences that would be common to them. So phases of the moon is a great example. Children will have seen the moon. They will wonder why it has different shapes. They will ask, why does this happen in this kind of way? And you can tap into that curiosity, that experience as part of the new learning that you're doing with those students. Play assists children to develop relationships and concepts, and we'll be looking at that at a moment, the different kinds of play that there are and how they can facilitate social learning in terms of relationships, as well as conceptual understanding as we go through. And it stimulates a sense of well-being, and it does this because when we're playing, we're having fun. You literally can't force a child to play in a meaningful kind of way. You can say, go outside and play. Doesn't mean they will. But a child playing will generally be having a positive experience. And having a positive experience while doing something makes us have a better regard for what we're doing in that kind of way. Can you find the science in these statements? Hopefully, take a moment. If you've got a piece of paper, maybe write one point down for each of one idea for each of these points. Allows for the expression of personality and uniqueness. What does that mean? How does that relate to science? Could it have to do with painting, expression of ideas, painting and creating something in a certain kind of way? No, I want you to just go through those. Take a moment, pause me, take a moment, write down one particular maybe experience or idea that you have about each of these kinds of points. Okay, I'll get a sip of water and unpause me when you're ready. All right. Now, recent research has looked at the idea of play, and I'm sure you've got an idea about this first point here. Kim indicates that creativity is declining in children aged 3 to 6. Is that your experience as well? I know my particular understanding is that things about digital technology have become more and more apparent with young children. And I guess digital technology, I'm not blaming digital technology, but like anything, it has to be balanced in hands-on kind of activities as well as some digital play. And digital play has an unfortunate reputation of being constraining creativity, because basically a programmer, to make a program work, has to have boundaries, limits to what the children can do in play space. Whereas in reality, it's more children putting a boundary or adults putting boundary on kids about what they can and can't do. And so that is one argument for why creativity may be in decline at that age. Other things can be maybe declining because of social pressures. The idea of this is how we play with Barbies, this is how we play with blocks and trucks and those kind of things. And children start to become more aware of that socialness and approval from other kids as part of that kind of process. Cropley found that play significantly enhanced young children's creativity through open-ended tasks where a solution was not immediately apparent and multiple solutions were possible. So providing opportunities for students to come to a solution, to play with objects in particular kind of ways without constraining them. There are multiple ways of resolving this particular challenge that you've provided them with. So open-ended tasks are really important in that kind of way. And again, consistent with that idea of digital technologies being a bit more closed as to what the possible solutions might be. Now, there are a lot of different definitions for play. Some of these are classical, some of these are a bit more contemporary, but generally across the theories, these are the kinds of things that we're thinking of. So play is symbolic, or it can be symbolic. So when I have a marker pen, this could become a gun in one context, it could become a lightsaber in another context. It could become a friend that I'm talking to and having a conversation with. So the idea that play is symbolic, what I've got in my hand isn't just a marker pen, it's so much more. And I'm sure you've had that experience with kids in your centers. Play is meaningful. Play is quite serious. I know my wife tells me stories about playing with her sister and having all sorts of materials across the lounge room. And I had to stay there across the school holidays. Parents were very unhappy about this, but that idea that play is meaningful, I'm doing something that you as an adult might see as frivolous, but they think is really important, that is really serious. And it's really good to acknowledge that with our kids. Okay. Play is active. So play is getting up and moving and doing things around, doing it with other people. Of course, you're going to have digital play, but children are actively playing, even if they've got a controller in their hand. Hopefully they're playing with other kids, hopefully in the same room. They might be on the internet in some sort of way, safety, supervision, all those kinds of things. But play is active. We're watching play, like, kids can watch a lot of videos of children playing games. That's not play, that's watching somebody play. But play is hands-on, it's active, it's meaningful, it's interactive. All these kinds of things come into it. Play is pleasurable. Like I said before, we can't force a child to play. They have to want to play in a particular kind of way. So generally play is pleasurable. There are social issues that can come into it where play can become unpleasant, but the main idea behind it is play, when it's at its best, is a pleasurable kind of thing for our kids. And play is voluntary. Like I said, we can't force a child to play. They have to want to be part of it if they're truly playing in this particular kind of way. Now, when we're thinking of play theory, we're also, obviously, we need to link it back to science and what we're actually doing in this unit. And there are a number of ways that science can enhance play as it's going on. And we talked about this in previous lectures, that idea of that incidental teaching on the spot, finding a teachable moment and using it to enhance thinking, enhance understanding. So if we're playing a board game that has certain science aspects to it, we can start to talk about some of those ideas that are related to the play that we're doing. So the idea of if you have a fulcrum, like a little pivot, and you've got a ruler over the top, putting something there and hitting the ruler and seeing it go fly, that's play. But it's also starting to think about how force is working, how a pivot does certain things, how a seesaw works in those particular kind of ways. If we're doing play and hiding behind things, is it good to maybe hide in a shadow? That idea of light and darkness starts to come into it. So, and I'm sure you've got a million examples you can think of where you can start to add a particular idea to the play that they're doing at that particular kind of time. Using play as the basis for further exploration. So how could we enhance this idea? So if we went back to that idea of Tiki, that is COVID-19, and vaccines is the way that you avoid getting it. What other ways, what further exploration could we do with our kids? How could we maybe incorporate masks into this kind of play? What does a mask do? How can we find out more information about that? If we're going to go vaccines, what does a vaccine do? Who invented a vaccine? What were they initially for? So we can have enhanced the learning of the particular situation by offering the next step that children can do. And maybe doing some research, looking it up on the internet with our kids, having a discussion, and then seeing how they can incorporate that back into their play as an extension of that kind of moment. Building additional resources to enhance the learning experience. Like I talked about before, if you've got an area in your early childhood center that's dedicated to medicine, what additional resources could we add? Could be books, could be videos that are relevant, that are on an iPad or on a computer in the area. Bringing in x-rays would be a good one for medicine, maybe having a model of a heart, maybe having a skeleton. All these ideas could be part of that kind of process. We're enhancing that learning experience through play. Just going to have a sip of water. Now this slide here, I love this slide. This is from chapter 7 of the 3rd edition. The next slide is from chapter 4, edition 4. And this looks at the different ways that we can think about play. Now, play is not just one thing. There are different types of play. So solitary play is quite an important one where a child is playing alone. Sometimes that can be seen as a negative, but I'm sure there are instances where children playing on their own is as satisfying to them as playing with other kids. Parallel play is quite an important one, playing next to each other or around each other. So, and you've probably seen something like this with kids playing with Lego. So they're all doing their own thing, but I'm watching you. Oh, I like that. I might try and incorporate that into what I'm doing. So, or, looking at how you use particular toys. Oh, okay, I've never thought about playing with it like that and incorporating it. So it's about learning, but it's also about social awareness of what they can do is what I can do as part of that process. Cooperative and collaborative play. Again, Lego is a great one for this. Cooperative play, so we're imagining we're all on a starship or a spaceship of some sort, and I'm going to build a so-and-so, and I'm going to build a so-and-so. So each of these are slightly different, and together it enhances the experience of us being on a spaceship as part of it. So it's cooperative and it's collaborative in that kind of way. Epistemic play is the idea of bringing existing knowledge to their play, just like the doctor's scenario that I talked about before. Symbolic play, using objects for ways they weren't intended. I'm sure you've got lots of experience in that sort of thing. Imaginative play, creating imaginary scenarios or using objects in creative ways. So imaginary scenarios, being a princess could be part of that. Being a police officer could be part of that as well. Ludic or fantasy play, imagine that they are others, such as fantasy characters or animals. Again, tapping into imaginative play there. Ludic play is very creative. kids in different kind of ways. And that socio-dramatic role play talked about going to a doctor's surgery, or maybe creating a vet surgery in your early childhood center to reenact something that's happened. Maybe they've had to bring their dog in to the vet. Maybe they've got a sore paw. How can the child express what they've done, what they've seen at a vet before? Of course, we want to make sure they haven't had a dog put down before. We may be getting into some sort of difficult areas, but all our kids are unique in that kind of way. Exploratory play. Children bring objects and phenomena into their play, bringing existing ideas to their play and developing new ideas, exploring new kind of structures, new ideas can become part of that. On the right-hand side, I'm not going to go through this, but the idea amongst them is that there are different ways that their needs are supported, their development, through social development, emotional development, and cognitive, creative development. All these kind of things linked to the different kinds of play. So make sure you have a look at that when you have the chance. Now, this is from the 4th edition. So there are other different types of play. So language play, rhyming with words, those kind of things, creative play, risk-taking play, make-believe play. All these things have a look. Slightly similar to what was on the previous page, but they have different kind of definitions and ideas in there. So make sure you have a look at that one. The importance of questioning. Why do teachers ask questions? So I want you to get out a piece of paper, and I want you to write down at least 4 ideas about why teachers ask questions. And I need a drink of water, so I'm going to pause the recording. I'll be right back. Write them down, at least 4 points. Okay, we're back. So why do teachers ask questions? Hopefully you have at least 4 points and how they can relate to the importance of questioning. Now, these are hopefully some of the reasons that you may have come up with to actively involve students in the lesson. We need to make sure our kids are part of the lesson that we're doing, part of the experience that we're going through. To increase their motivation or interest, involving them, making it more relevant to what they're doing. To evaluate students' preparation. So we need to ask them, oh, really? Is that what you think happens when so-and-so happens? We can make an evaluation of their understanding, and that's what I'm trying to get you guys to do with AT1, 2, and 3 as part of that process. To develop critical or higher order thinking skills. It's really important. We're going to go through that in a moment. We want them to be critical. We want them to think more deeply about what they're actually doing and seeing. To assess prior understandings. This is pretty much what assessment 2 is. We're looking at what they already know, a diagnostic assessment. To assess achievement or mastery of goals and objectives. Again, this is about assessment. How can we know what they actually learned? And stimulate independent learning. They've got their own ideas. They've got their own questions. How can we uncover what those questions are and do something meaningful with it as an educator? Right. So there are models for higher order thinking skills. And probably one of the most famous ones in education is Bloom's taxonomy, that idea of knowledge, comprehension, application, etc. And there are various revisions by Anderson and Fogarty, but we're going to look at Bloom's taxonomy in a moment. And what we mean by higher order thinking skills is very much apparent in this image here. So we're going with the metaphor of a building. There are 3 stories. Now, I'm going to get you to focus on that bottom one first. So whenever we start to learn something, not as an early childhood student, as a high school student, and even as an adult, when we start learning something, we need to learn the fundamentals to begin with, don't we? If I'm learning a new language, if I'm learning Spanish or French or Dutch or whatever, I need to start learning words. I need to start learning nouns, stapler, marker pen, those kind of things. I need to start knowing my alphabet. I need to start being able to say my numbers, days of the week, months, all these kinds of things begin with. And as I start to develop my ideas, I start to move into verbs. If you're in a Romance language like Spanish, when it's I do, you do, we do, they do, we all do, that kind of stuff starts to shape our understanding of the processes that we're going through. And that's the same with our kids. They're learning about science quite often for the first time in certain areas, and they need to know the basics. So things at that first level are things like complete. They're counting things. They might come up with their own definition of something. They're describing things. They're identifying. They're listing things, matching things, naming things, observing things, and selecting things. So these are things that are in front of them. that they can observe and describe and be part of that initial experience of going through things. Then we want them to go to that next level, okay? We need to start comparing things, contrasting things, classifying things, distinguishing things, explaining things, asking why, analyze, synthesize, make analogies, reason. Hopefully you can start to see the distinction between these two. So if I'm doing the floating and sinking activity that we did in week 1, I'm starting off by literally putting things in water, and I'm asking my students to make a prediction of some sort. We'll get to the predictions in a minute. Then I'm asking my students to observe. It's that low-level thinking that we're starting off. We're just observing what happened. We're describing what happened and those kind of things. The next level up asks us to start to come to some conclusions about this. If I start putting all the things that floated in this box here, and I put all the things that sank in this box here, we're classifying them. Well, we're categorizing them in that kind of way. But I'm going to ask my students to come to some sort of conclusion. What makes all these floating things similar? And what makes all these sinking things similar as well? And they may come to the conclusion that they're light for their size, that they're heavy for their size, they're all made of plastic, they're all made of wood, they're all made of metal, and these kind of things. They start to classify them. We start to unpack the reasons why this classification might be important. So you guys know what a Venn diagram is? So that's another way that we can start to classify those things in meaningful kind of ways. We might start making analogies. Well, it's like this. It's similar to when I did this. We're starting to compare it to things that have happened in our real life. So we're moving a step beyond that first level where the things are in front of us. We're moving to start to see patterns in here. What are some patterns we can see that allow us to make some sort of conclusion about this? And that takes us up to our next level, where we're evaluating, we're generalizing, we're imagining, judging, predicting, speculating. We're saying, if this happens, then this must be the next stage. We're applying a principle, we're hypothesizing. So once we've done that compare, contrast, classify, we go to that next level where we're starting to generalize as to a rule about these kind of things. We're making that prediction to begin with. So when we do a POE, we're starting at that top level. We're making a prediction. Based on my experience, what do I think is going to happen? What do I imagine is going to occur next? Then we go to the bottom level, observing what's in front of us to see what evidence that we can see, can count, that we can define, we can describe. And then we're going to that next level in between of starting to compare, to contrast, to classify. So as you can see, with something like the POE, we're moving between each of these levels. At certain times, we will want our students to go to that top level. We can't do it every time, but once they've started to build up enough experience with something, they can start to come to those conclusions. Okay, so when we're questioning our students, it may be important to stick to that low level, asking to make an observation, to define things. But we also want to try and move them up to the other two levels as part of that process. And that's what Bloom's taxonomy is about. The idea we're encouraging behaviors, that is hypothesizing, predicting, etc., that are of different levels of thinking that are appropriate to the task that we're trying to apply, or appropriate to the task, appropriate to the students that we're working with. Really important. Right, so how do we encourage that third story thinking? We're asking open-ended questions that require knowledge and speculation. So this might be knowledge that they're already bringing, or this could be knowledge that they're developing as they move through their understanding. So that open-ended question, what might change if the Earth moved further from the sun? That's not an easy question. What would actually happen? Problem-posing questions. These are context-bound and depend on prior knowledge. So in this case, the example here is, can you find a way to keep an ice block from melting outside the fridge? That's a great activity. So basically put a block of ice in your hand. How can you find a way to keep this ice block from melting? What's something that I need to do? It doesn't matter what they do, because it gives you insight into what their thinking is. Do I put it on a piece of plastic? Do I put it, do I cup it in my hands? Do I try and shift from one to the other? Why are you doing that? Oh, well, because if I move from one to the other, it's going to stay cool, whatever the reasoning is behind that. But a problem-solving question, problem-posing question allows them to actually do something to come to some sort of solution. Okay, it's also known as a processing question. A productive question, I'm sorry, not a processing question. A reasoning question. They're quite broad, they're often philosophical, they have no definite answer. Are snails good mothers? Now, this starts to get to the border of what is actually science. How can we actually answer that question? But it's interesting because students then have to think about, well, what do we mean? Snails are good mothers. One, what's a good mother? Okay, that's an interesting question in and of itself. Not necessarily scientific, but it's a good philosophical kind of question. What would make a good mother for a snail in that kind of way? Not easily resolved, but a worthwhile thing to stimulate ideas and stimulate thinking in that kind of way. And we've all remembered that time we've gotten this question that is philosophical of some sort of nature that have made us think for, that was really interesting. That had me thinking about that particular idea for days afterwards. That's a good question that you've received. Suggest how you can use questions to extend and engage children. So I'm going to get you to pause me for a minute. I'm going to get you to write down at least 2 ideas about how you can use a question to extend or engage children in a particular idea or in play or in learning. Okay, I'm going to have a quick drink. You write down some answers and then unpause me. Okay. Right, so these are some of the answers that I would have expected. So we can lead children to make an observation. Oh, really? So what else did you observe about what happened when I lifted the cup? So lead the children to make observations. Did you notice that? Who noticed that these kind of questions can help students make more close observations? And observations can be visual. Observations can be, what happens if you put your hands on the basketball that's in the tub of water and push down? Does it feel any different? This week in chemistry, we're going to be doing the baking soda and vinegar experiment, and there are going to be a lot of observations there that are quite different to what you'd expect. They can help children suggest and conduct an experiment to find an answer. So if a student is wondering, how can I make a paper airplane that flies the furthest? And it's like, that's a great question. What could we do in that case? So we could actually bring in a lot of paper, might have different videos about how to make paper airplanes. We could have a discussion about it. Is it long wings? Is it flat? Is it light? What happens if I make it out of cardboard? There's a whole range of different trains of thought that we could explore with these students in this inquiry about making paper airplanes in that kind of way. We can help children to solve a problem, such as how to place blocks during a construction. And I talked about this last time, that idea of block play comes into it. How can I ask them a question that will stimulate the thinking about how I can make this structure stand up better or stand differently in unique kind of ways? Okay, so maybe these are some of the solutions, some of the answers that you had to the question before. Now, we talked about this last week, the idea of the 5 E's. So the 5 E's are primary connection, which is a series of modules for kids, primary age, but we can adopt them for an early childhood kind of context. Now, each of the 5 E's, so we have, so on the left-hand side there, you have engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. And the 5 E's takes students through this sequence of lessons where we engage them. There's that diagnostic assessment, get them in, have a good understanding. Explore, where we start to give them a little bit of a challenge to explore, whether it's floating and sinking or states of matter, that kind of thing. We ask them, after they've had an explore, then to explain. They explain to us the developing understanding of what's going on, what they think is going on. And then that we provide them with a little bit more difficult challenge that gets them to elaborate on what they have already done in the previous 3 E's. And then we evaluate. We have another task that has to take into account what they've already done in the 4 E's beforehand, and will give us some idea and assessment of what they've learned in that particular kind of way. Now, this slide here starts to look at the questioning that we do at each of these levels, and this is really important for AT2, because in AT2 you need to have an understanding of questioning. You also have to have an understanding of why I'm asking this particular kind of questions. So that one there, engage, we would ask broad questions that encourage students to discuss their ideas and experiences. So when we ask open-ended questions, we want to get ideas on the table so other students go, I've got the same idea, or I didn't think that, or I thought that. When this happened, I thought that. So there's a whole discussion going on. So some of the sample questions on the right. So what do you mean by that? Can you tell me more about that? Okay, that's interesting. What makes you think that? How do you know that? How did you find about that idea? So it could be, oh, mum and dad work for CSIRO, or I watched it on the video, my older brother told me that, those kind of things. We start to tap into how they knew things to begin with. Exploring questions. So questions that encourage students to discuss their ideas and express common experiences. So how are you going to? That idea of a producing question. Explain focuses questions that reinforce the explanation of a concept. Remember, they're explaining it. Now, a question would be, how will you be able to tell if it stayed in the air the longest, if it fell the quickest, all these kinds of things. Then we have elaborate questions that help students understand the concept in a new situation. As for explore, how would you verify that? So if we're doing a paper plane experiment in engage and explore, and then our elaborate lesson becomes, how can I deploy this parachute so that it stays in the air longer than longer than the rest? We're exploring some of the ideas that we would have done earlier in a new and unique kind of way. And then evaluate questions that assess students' understandings. What have you found out? What else do we need to know? So we're starting to refine the questions to be based on what they've already done, what they've already experienced, what they've classified, what they've hypothesized already as part of that process. So in AT2, make sure that you ask a range of questions. Don't make them all open-ended. Don't make them all closed-ended. Have producing questions. Have questions that relate to particular students. John, I saw what you were doing there before, and I want you to tell everyone, what made you think to do that? And John can then explain. Okay. Now, an example of questioning is this example here. So a child was reflecting sunlight onto a wall with a mirror. The teacher asked, why does the mirror reflect sunlight? The child had no way of knowing this, felt bad about it, and learned nothing. Let's repeat that question again. So the quote, a child was reflecting sunlight, so had a mirror, reflecting it onto a wall. The teacher asked, why does the mirror reflect sunlight? The child had no way of knowing, felt bad about it, and learned nothing. Now, before I continue, I'm going to get you to write down how could that question could have been changed, suggest some questions the teacher could have asked. Maybe they could have asked following this question or instead of this question. Okay, I'll have a sip of water. You write it down. Now, in my mind, this question, why does the mirror reflect sunlight? That adds a level of complexity that is not needed. So you're asking, I think the teacher was asking, how does the mirror reflect sunlight? What's happening when I move the mirror? How does this thing work? Why does the mirror reflect sunlight? To me, has an aspect of agency. So why did you pick up that ball? Is an underlying sense of agency. Why did you do that? And it's not really the case. We're not saying that the mirror is actively trying to reflect sunlight. It just does. So that becomes more of the mechanics of it. There's a light here, travels hits the mirror, and then hits the wall. That is the kind of question I would have asked. That how question makes it a little bit more simple in that kind of way. And the author of the paper suggested, what do you get when you stand twice as far away from the wall? Now, this is a question that could have been asked afterwards or instead of the question that we saw before, because this then actually, the student can then think about it and then actually try it. So it's a producing question. This encourages the child to experiment and to observe directly, okay? It doesn't stop them and say, why does it do this? I don't know. Why does the sun attract Earth to its core? How is a different kind of question. So make sure you think about what you're actually asking for and the words that you're using, because sometimes they can block us when we're not expecting the question to be phrased in that kind of way. So when reflecting on the previous scenario and the importance of questioning as a teaching strategy, I want you to think about this. Describe how you learn best. How do you respond to questions people ask you, especially in a learning context? Okay, write them down. So maybe get 2 or 3 ideas about how you learn best and the kind of questions you like to answer. Now, to me, this is really important because you need to think about why you're asking the questions. You need to think about how you're asking the questions. So when I'm meeting someone for the first time, I might say, hey, what do you do? This is an open-ended question. Trying to get an idea about this person, about what they do, so I can continue having this conversation. Maybe we just met and I'm just wanting to, hey, have a to and fro conversation with this person. But when we think about how do you learn best, you may have been confronted with questions in the past that I don't know. And one question could be, so think about it in terms of structure. So if I'm going to go with an analogy here. So if you think about kids and the way they play, some kids, you can just give them a piece of paper and some pens and marker pens, crayons, off you go. Can you draw me something? It's a very open-ended question. The experience is open-ended. It's a blank piece of paper here. Now, there are some kids who like coloring and they need to have the lines, they need structure as part of this. So they want to maybe color something in. They don't want to just draw on a blank canvas. They need to have structure to begin with to get their thinking processes to occur. And some kids just love blank pages and just going off and doing whatever they want. There are certain ways that we can come to things and certain ways that we work. I know I work best if I have some music. If I don't have any music, I find I can't start. But if there's music playing, just soft music, whatever, I can get into it and stay focused in that kind of way. So when you're asking a question, you could be asked something super broad, and it's probably happened to you when you're growing up. What are you going to be when you grow up? That's a really hard question, depending on where you are in your life. You have no idea. Maybe you don't have any idea now what you want to do with your life, and that's fine. But it's such an open-ended question. There's no structure to that question, is there? But if I ask the question, all right, so what are you going to do when you finish uni, when you finish high school? Okay, then that's a smaller question. Sorry, I'm going to do something at the end of this degree. I'm going to get employed by an early childhood center. I'm going to be the world's greatest teacher. I'm going to travel. I got married. We haven't had our honeymoon yet. I'm going to go traveling. We start to link it to smaller things, behaviors, things that we want to do with our lives. Okay. Or we could ask closed-ended questions. Okay, you're doing this degree, so I think, if you're coming to this degree, why did you decide to do early childhood or primary or secondary, whichever one you wanted to do? Again, that's a smaller question. That's a clarifying, that's an expanding question. So it could be broad. We could take that. The answer could be quite broad. Well, I'm going to tell you the story of my life. All my family were teachers. My grandfather was a teacher, my grandmother was a teacher, all that kind of thing. Or it could be that, oh, I just really like working with little kids. It's great. I love it. And that kind of thing. So when you're asking a question, think about how broad the question is. And there are going to be contexts where a broad-ended question is just too much. And when a closed-ended question isn't quite enough. Okay? So when you put that object in the water, did it float or sink? It floated. Okay, we're kind of stuck there. We need to ask another question. Okay, so what happened when it floated? Did it just stay at the top or did it go down a bit? We're asking a first question, we're asking a second question, might be even asking a third question. And in your assessment 2 task, you need to have these ideas planned. What's your first question? What's your second question? Maybe what's your third question based on what's going to happen in this interaction. Now, coming to the end of the lecture, I'm going to pop this in the window on YouTube. So make sure you watch this one. So this looks at primary connection and the kinds of questions that we ask as part of that process. And it's similar to the slide I had before. So take 5 minutes. I'm going to pause the video now. So take your time, watch the video and come back and we'll discuss it in a moment. Okay, so I hope you watched the video. I hope you got some insight into the kinds of questions kids like, why we ask questions, and what we're thinking when we're writing the questions, when we're planning the questions, and the importance of doing that. So we're coming to the end of the lecture, but these are the things I want you to start to think about. How can we get kids to ask their own questions? Well, what's the importance of that? So we ask students to ask their own questions because we want them to be able to think about the information of what they've been doing and linking it in meaningful kind of ways. So doing floating and sinking, how does students might relate this to experiences they've had at home, experiences they've had in the early childhood center? They might come up with a question to ask you. What are we going to do to stimulate, to continue to extend that kind of experience? Student questions allow sharing of intellectual control and promote interest, engagement, and purposeful learning. So we know how engaged children are when we're focusing on something that interests them. That's what we're trying to do. We're coming up with an experience based on what's meaningful to them in that particular kind of moment. Student questions raise students' self-esteem. Low achieving students can be very good question askers. And this, it's really important. Kids love it when adults take them seriously, that they're not just dismissing them and they're just not providing them with the answer, but giving them the opportunity to explore that question. That question that you're asking me is meaningful. So meaningful, I'm going to try and find a way we can explore that in the next couple of days, or in this particular instance with a teachable moment. Student questions provide insight into students' constructed meaning and can highlight misconceptions, or in our case, alternate conceptions as well. So, it's really important to, what does photosynthesis mean? It's a great question. So, where did you hear the word photosynthesis? And then what do you think it means? So before you answer the question, if you're going to, ask them, what do you think it means? Well, I think it has to do with why a cactus is green. Like, okay, that's an interesting idea. How could we explore that? Are all plants green? And that kind of thing. So it's worthwhile having a look at and using that as a teachable moment. Encouraging question models effective questioning skills. So if they ask a question, so okay, how could we answer that question? So before, like the idea of what makes what had to do with snails, what makes a good mum or a snail? Is that kind of questioning we could do? Could we revise that question to be something that we could manage? What's the bounciest ball that we've got? Okay, so how could we explore that particular kind of question that we have from our students? How could we refine that to be a scientific question? The bounciest ball, what does that mean? That's the ball that bounces the highest. Okay, so how could we measure which ball bounces the highest? Is how we might refine the question. We encourage students by providing a classroom environment which is safe and invites students to ask questions. There are no stupid questions. We don't want to make fun of anyone that has a question that doesn't quite make sense. And we can do that gently and warmly so that they know I can ask another question and my teacher is not going to make fun of me, or the teacher is not going to let other people make fun of me for that question. It promotes positive reinforcement when students ask questions, encourages students to ask further questions. What I just said, having a safe space, I can feel more confident asking my teacher and my classmates more questions. Clarifying students' questions, ensuring that the question has been suitably answered, and assisting the student or asking students to rephrase their question to elicit the information they are looking for or conceptual development they are uncertain of. So that idea before of what is photosynthesis? What do you think it means? What do you think it applies to? Can I photosynthesize? How can we refine the question? Okay, and it could be they just want to know what the definition is. And so does that answer your question? Is a good one. Is that what you were asking me? Could be another question. Do you mean this? Could be another question. So there are ways of clarifying what the student is actually asking, which is really important, because there's nothing worse than a student asking you a question and you go off in this long tangent or experience or other kind of things that you can do, and that's not what I was actually asking. It can be a difficult thing. So it's worthwhile having a think about that. All right, that's all I have for you today. I hope you're having a good week in week 3, and I look forward to seeing you online or face-to-face next week. Thanks, guys. Bye.